And that's how psychedelics work. Psychedelics don't tell you, go to the expert that will solve things, and psychedelics show you that there are answers inside of you, and actually good answers, and that if we provide the conditions, our bodies, our psyches, they naturally move towards a more integrated or to healing.
Welcome to Inner Source. I'm Dr. Sandra Dreisbach. Whether you're just beginning to explore your inner landscape or you've been doing this work for years and understand that transformation is a lifelong journey, this is your space. We're diving into real conversations about personal growth, shadow work, and what it actually takes to create lasting change from the inside out. Because the truth, your most powerful healing tool isn't out there somewhere. It's already within you. Let's connect to that inner source together.
The information shared on this podcast, our website, and other platforms may be triggering for some viewers and readers and is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. While we explore topics related to altered states of consciousness, we do not endorse or encourage illegal activities or substance use. Always research your local laws and consult qualified professionals for guidance. The content provided is, as is, and we are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared. Stay supported and informed, act responsibly, and enjoy the podcast.
In this episode of Inner Source, I have the honor and pleasure of speaking with Marc from ICEers. He actually has over 1,000 clients he's seen, or cases at least he's addressed as a part of being in ICEers support line. And if you aren't familiar with ICEers, you should definitely check it out. I'll let him describe it more in this episode. But one of the things I really appreciate about Marc is his ability to really bridge the wisdom of psychotherapy into healing and transformation and integration. He also has a book, if you haven't checked it out, also, I would highly recommend it. It's one of the pieces that I had looked to at integration before I even took additional integration training. And I'll admit, I think I maybe even say it in this episode, that I took integration training through the ICEers program, and it's offered now both in Spanish and English. Really phenomenal. And I've been through multiple integration trainings, but I really appreciate the grounded, informed basis in which these teachings and his insights and his wisdom comes from. And there are a few people I feel like I can point to can really have a sense of their inner source when it comes to building that integration, not just from a sort of intellectual, theoretical sort of lens, but from real practice, from real lived experience, and also from, the world of psychedelics, both recreationally as well as therapeutically. It's a real pleasure and a real treat to talk with Marc, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Inner Source. Well, welcome, Marc. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to have you here on the podcast. And I know we've introduced you a little bit before the show, but is there anything you would like, in your own words, to say about, who are you? What are you focused on in this space?
Thank you, Sandra, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and reconnect. And that's a very interesting question, not one that gets answered very often. That's something that I feel that is changing. It changes for all of us, I guess, how we perceive ourselves through our life. But it's true that in the last couple of years, that change has been more noticeable for me. I've been a father for a second time 3 months ago. So I identify very much as a father, as a provider for my family, and a source of support, income, and stability, which is something that a new experience for me. Been working mostly for myself, in my interests. My career has been very much driven by my interests, and when I wanted to do a job, I tried to do it, and when I wanted to stop a job, I stopped it. So I felt quite free in that regard. But nowadays, I see that my kids and my family are the priority, and my job is becoming like a tool or something on the back burner. And I'm still trying to get used to that, So I would say that my identity is somehow blurred compared to how it used to be, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah.
Well, I love that because of your work in integration. Because you're really literally speaking about like an identity shift, right? You're speaking to a shift in how you see yourself or your role in the world or your role in relationship. And it's literally because of relationship that it's shifted. And I am curious about it because we're both parents, and I don't probably talk enough about being a parent and how that's changed me as a person. And I think it really changes all of us, and all of our relationships define us. One thing that comes up for me when thinking about psychedelic work sometimes is that a lot of people don't think about beginning with the end in mind. Like what kind of where they see themselves, becoming, even though I mean, yeah, we talk about intentions and a sense of like, okay, healing or transformation, but there isn't often a sense of what that really looks like before they begin. That I feel that sometimes people feel even more extra lost when they think they've reached the other side. Although I think that's an illusion too. So I'm curious, since you're in this identity shift, like how does that show up for you now, given your work in integration and
Hmm.
in the psychedelic space?
Yeah, it is true that many times people don't start in the psychedelic path with the end in mind, or we forget the end quite early on as we start the journey. Yeah, well, there might be something that calls us to start a transformational journey through psychedelics, through meditation, through non-ordinary states. And sometimes these really heart-opening, enlightening, impressive experiences shift the focus towards something else. And then we forgot what we were doing here, what we were working on. And although that can be interesting, sometimes it is not the best approach if one is looking for certain results. Yeah, so if you don't know where you're going, it's unlikely that you will get there. And sometimes with psychedelics, we can get lost in the path. Yeah. Um, Although I think that there's nothing wrong with using psychedelics without an end in mind. Psychedelics can be tools for exploration, for recreation, for enjoyment, for connection, and the experience in itself can be something valuable. Yeah. My concern would be more when we start mixing concepts. Am I using this for therapy? Am I using it for transformation? Am I using it for recreation? Because then sometimes we pretend that we're doing a spiritual work when basically we're just trying to get high. Nothing wrong with getting high, but
No, and I love that you bring this up because I think we do tend to mix purposes, right? We do tend to, and then I'm not saying it has to fit neatly into any box. As a philosopher, I'm not going to necessarily be so tempted to do that. Maybe we could talk a bit about your journey. Like, how did you come into relationship originally with this work, right? Was it because of your own personal transformation? Was it primarily recreational?
well, I would guess that that's also an example of a mixture of purposes. Yeah. Although I have to say that my first interest in psychedelics was after a period in my life in which I was struggling and suffering. There was a relationship that had ended unexpectedly. All of a sudden, I had a lot of free time, not to be spent with a lot of joy, and was maybe in the early days of the internet when information was available. So I spent some hours reading. I came across some websites, Erowid, blue light forums, and that caught my interest. So I spent a really significant amount of time just being a geek and reading and getting a lot of information, then going to the library, getting some books, reading books in the basement of my mom's pharmacy. She had books about plants and stuff. So I spent a lot of time reading before I decided to have any experience. And the way that I approached that experience was as something that would help me overcome that heartbreak that I was feeling, and something that would help me move into a next phase of my life. And of course, I was soon to discover that it worked, but it was not the miracle that I was expecting. It was definitely an experience that made me kind of be in a turning point. But after that, there was still work to be done. There were still things to be worked through, and the healing path was not straightforward. I would say that yes, that experience helped me to move forward, to get into a new stage in my life, but then something else opened up, and I was studying to be an engineer back then. I ended up being an engineer, But psychedelics opened other venues inside of myself and other interests that make me reconsider what my vocation, what my passion in life was. And then it was a mixed journey of recreation, self kind of personal work, and also trying to find a path towards what do I want to do in my life. What do I want to bring to the world? What kind of job do I want to do? What do I want to create? So I would say that what really shifted my relationship with non-ordinary states of consciousness was holotropic breathwork. My psychedelic journeys had been a mixture of spiritual journeys, recreational journeys, kind of personal growth journeys, but breathwork gave me somehow the backbone to put those experiences together and feel that I was on a path and that path was actually going somewhere. And that's how I could decide to study psychology, to become a breathwork facilitator, and then everything started to come into place. So that was somehow an integration of scattered experiences that I have had in different contexts that started to making sense and created a path for me.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Because I mean, you can even see the initial touchstone being the sort of relationship breakup, right? The transformation really had begun. Working with psychedelics was a part of the journey, but then it opened you up to other processes like holotropic breath work, other ways of thinking about yourself, other ways of doing work in the world. And then as you continued on, right, then you actually literally shifted what your work was. And how would you describe, what do you do? Like when someone comes up to you at a recreational event that, not involved in psychedelics, and they're like, oh, oh, you're so-and-so's father. Oh, what do you do for a living? What do you say?
So my first answer is that I'm a psychologist because it's true. So most of my hours during the week are devoted to seeing people. Some of that is related to psychedelics and integration. A lot of it is not, so I treat human suffering, anxiety, depression, couples therapy. So normal sort of therapy. So that's my main job. And then, of course, and I'm specialized in working in non-ordinary states of consciousness. So I do holotropic breathwork retreat and also train people in holotropic breathwork. And in these last years, I've been very much involved in clinical trials with psilocybin in Barcelona. So I've been training psychedelic therapists, working as a therapist in clinical trials, mentoring psychedelic therapists, and that's been an important part of my job. So mostly I'm a psychology psychotherapist, and then I also have a teaching part.
Yeah, and in all full disclosure, like we've had the opportunity to work together, and me receiving your teaching work and learning from you around integration, and I do want to say that I really enjoyed the iSeers integration course, and I would highly recommend people check it out and try it out. But I want to go back a little bit to something you mentioned about your mother. You said she was a pharmacist. So could you tell me a little bit about her? Like, and you also mentioned plants. So what I am definitely American. So like what my idea of what that is may be different from what it is in Spain. And I'm assuming you were born in Spain, but I don't know that. So I'm just kind of curious, especially given psychedelics and given relationships with plants and plant medicines is very much of interest. And with iSeers in particular, defending Indigenous and First Nations use of plant medicines. Where did you start having that sort of respect?
I think it was something that built up slowly and progressively, but some of my most fond memories from childhood are in my mom's pharmacy basement. There was like two-story pharmacy, and in the basement she had her laboratory. And this was like old school sort of pharmacy when pharmacists actually did things.
She did. She was a compounding pharmacist.
Yeah. She did creams, powders, capsules. So she had the whole equipment there, and there was this huge shelf full of small boxes and things and vials and stuff. It looked a little bit like, saving the distances, like the Shulgin farm, with all these. Yeah, so it was full of things. So I spent hours reading what this was. It is whatever. And so I was just reading the labels of things. My mom allowed me to play with certain stuff that was not dangerous. So she even had like mercury that I was playing with mercury. That we don't do that now with kids. Like, And then she even asked for my help to prepare some of the creams and the capsules that she was doing. So now weight this chemical in certain amount. She had this high precision scale, so I would weight that. Now let's add to the mixer, and then she would mix stuff. Let's put things on the capsule. How do you do that? Da, da, da. And then let's clean the capsule, so when the person takes the capsule, it won't taste bitter. So it was the whole process, and I was part of that, and I enjoyed that very much. It was like making some sort of magic and playing with compounds, and I spent countless hours doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that so much. And that she involved you in the process, and that's some of your early exposure. So clearly you weren't scared of substances.
Never thought it like that, but it's true. Yeah, yeah.
Was she working with plants as well as pharmacopoeia?
She always had an interest in plants, and she still has that at home. She has this pharmacy. I don't know how to call it, like ceramic spots in which old pharmacists used to put plant-based material. So you have the names of each plant, and chamomile, opium, cannabis sativa. So she has these spots like back in the old days. No, so she's always been very much into plant, and she had some post-degree studies in botanics and stuff. Not that she's at all into any psychedelic stuff, but she was into compounds, plants, and she had this amazing book. It's called the Dioscorides by a Spanish guy that he wrote many years ago about all sorts of psychoactive and medicinal plants. And in that book, there's the article of Life magazine about Gordon Wasson and Maria Sabina. So that was the first time that I read about magic mushrooms, was in the basement of my mom's pharmacy.
How old were you?
I don't know. Maybe around, 15, 16, I don't know. Somewhere before university, I would say. So
Yeah, well, because it makes me curious because we were talking about parenthood, right? And I've been thinking a little bit more about like how I introduce some of these ideas and concepts, or how I introduce ideas about responsibility and altered states. So I'm curious about what was taught to you. Feel free not to answer any question, by the way. When did you start experimenting, or when did what was your relationship with like alcohol or caffeine or some of these other stuff? Given that you had more access, literally you're in the laboratory mixing up formulations and you're playing with mercury, right? So there had to have been a conversation or something. I'm just dying to know.
that's interesting, because I guess that maybe in the US, the relationship with alcohol is different than in Spain or in the Mediterranean countries. For us, it's never been a big deal. So my parents, they drank at celebrations like Christmas, I don't know, birthday parties and all that. But it was never something that was present as a problem, So I've always, I was growing up in a culture in which alcohol was a substance that can be used and that can be misused as well. But with proper education, proper role models, you don't end up abusing alcohol. You use it in a healthy way, healthy as possible. Yeah. So that was never something that I received like education specifically about. It just happened. Same with coffee, but then when it came to hard drugs, then the message was very clear: this is bad, And my family has never had any history of interest in psychoactive substances, and that's not part of their values. So it's taken a while, some decades, for them to actually be proud about what I do. And now there's these clinical studies that are happening, and this is a serious thing. And I go to Madrid to talk on a conference in the doctor's hall, and everything is very serious.
You're like, it's very reputable, Mom.
No, exactly. Now it's reputable, and they see that, and they see that it's reputable. But 20 years ago, it was not so reputable. So it was a different story. Or 30 years ago, whatever. No, so yeah.
No, but I appreciate that. Actually, we have some of this in common, because like my parents were actually quite modest in terms of relationship. I didn't have a sense of taboo around alcohol, but they would have like a drink or two with like at the holidays, maybe a bottle of wine would come out, or they'd go out to eat and they'd have a single drink. And as far as I knew, no one had any problems with any substances in my family. And the only thing extra was around caffeine. I guess was more of some sort of religious thing where like my grandmother would only have, she would put half coffee and half water because that was supposed to be a little bit better because my grandfather didn't approve of her having any coffee. Again, this is one of those things like I didn't get the story. I just got, like, I guess I got part of the story. But like when I started being interested in having coffee and consuming coffee in high school, right? My parents weren't drinking coffee. I had a cousin who drank some coffee, but then I had this story about, how it was maybe spiritually taboo. But it's definitely got the just say no to drugs. That was, I'm part of definitely in the generation that got that just say no. But I'm actually surprised now that's still pretty much the philosophy of the education still here, at least in the United States. It's still pretty much just, they put everything baby and bathwater together. You don't touch this stuff at all, and there's no sense of nuance. And maybe this is a good transition time to talk about your work with ICEers. So I know you helped to found ICEers. Why don't you say for the audience what ICEers is and why did it come about?
I don't know if I feel entitled enough to answer what ICERS is nowadays,
Okay, yeah, no, it's true. Honestly, like I try and make it clear, like no one of us should be responsible for having the answer for a whole community. And I, as someone who helped to co-found Epic, I don't feel like I can tell the full story of Epic either, right? But it definitely has been a huge part of my life, at least
Yeah,
in the past few
absolutely.
years.
And the story is interesting. I mean, Ben Delonen, he founded ICERS. That was his project that started after he did a movie. He did that movie, Ibogaine Rite of Passage. And then things started. And truth is that at the beginning, ICERS was just a group of people that we were interested in psychoactive substances. And we had different interests around that. Some people were leaning more into the indigenous interest. Some people were pharmacologists and were more interested in research. I was a psychologist and I was interested in the therapeutic use of psychedelic substances. Other people were more interested in cannabis and how to bring cannabis to a new legal status. So back in the day, we're just a group of friends that we actually became friends through these connections. We didn't know each other. For example, I met Ben Delonen at Boom Festival, a psytrance festival. Yeah. So that's where we met. We started working together. We clicked. We found that we were both living in Barcelona. Then we met all the people, and then we started gathering around Ben and what he was doing. So my role at ICERS has always been to support people that were having some sort of distress or some doubts or worries about their experiences. So that's how I co-founded the integration and support service back in the day. Yeah, and that's been my main role for most of my involvement with ICERS until we created the ICERS Academy, and then we started creating training programs. And now my role is more creating content and providing training. Yeah, but for many years, my role has been to develop integration models to support people in integration. And other of my colleagues have been more involved with legal support for people that were having ayahuasca shipments seized by the police. Other colleagues were more involved in science. So there's been different branches at ICERS, which it doesn't make it very efficient in terms of an organization and where you're going, but it makes it more nuanced regarding what psychedelics and psychoactive plants are, because these are not just psychedelic medicines. There are other approaches to that. So
Even just saying that, I think it's harder sometimes for other people to understand outside of this space, outside of this industry, the amount of complexity that's involved and the amount of, like, I never thought I'd be studying a part of neurobiology. I mean, I'm not saying I'm an expert at all, but I'm like, I needed to know a little bit more about it in order to be able to be in this space or learning more about particular traditions. Or personally, I focused on, moral psychology and ethical decision making. And that was my motivation and framing, right? And now, like, the amount of shadow work I've done is insane. A lot of people associate you with integration. Maybe this would be a good opportunity to say, like, well, how do you define what's integration?
I always answer a similar thing, that I try to explain what integration is by not providing a reductionist definition of integration. if anybody that knows my work, you know that I talk about integration first in a time frame. So integration is what happens after the experience. But then I start talking about metaphors to understand integration. What are the metaphors that can describe different aspects of integration? Sometimes I imagine integration as a cube or a shape that has many sides, and depending on which side you're looking at, you're seeing something different, but that's still the same thing, so we shouldn't be fixed to one definition of integration. So I define integration through metaphors, through 7 dimensions like body, mind, spirit, behavior, social, time, and emotions. And yeah, that's basically the part of the definition of integration. Then what kind of integration? Are we talking about maximizing benefits? Are we talking to support somebody that has had problems because of a particular experience? So different scenarios and needs are also part of what defines integration. And I think that that's important to have a nuanced understanding about what integration is, because otherwise it seems that you should do certain things in order to do a proper integration. And nobody can tell you that. There's not a single path towards integration. Integration is something that is ongoing, something that becomes a life journey in a way. Who knows if I would have been a father if I wouldn't have had psychedelic experiences back in the day, or the person that I became to be today. Maybe it's because of some of the experiences, but it's not because I sat and I journaled and I did a integration coaching session with somebody that these things happened. So yeah, I think it's a more complex approach, and at the same time more simple in the sense that it happens. Yeah, you don't need to go to a professional to do a proper integration. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it is not needed. So in that sense, I have a very kind of free understanding of what integration can be for different people at different times.
No, and I love this because, well, not just to not reduce it to a single definition, but I think also to point out that, first of all, complexity on how it shows up, because people will use and drop the name integration, just like people drop the word preparation. But I think it's even worse for integration, that people feel like, okay, we just had a conversation after ceremony and it was our integration. And I'm like, well, you had a integration moment or a conscious moment to have to help support integration, but that's not the whole like integration package, or doesn't describe all of what it means to be integrated. And I love that you have, both the metaphor, or looking at it as that shape or the different dimensions. I notice a sense of inquiry, right? That if you were working with someone, you probably might even ask them. If someone comes to you seeking integration support, right? Usually it's not because they received it, right? Or there's usually some sort of issue or something arising for them that they're seeking support. And maybe you could say something about that. So like, okay, granted, we can't put a one box solution, or maybe it's your whole life, right? You were never, the journey's never really over because we're still living, maybe not even beyond. When should someone seek integration support?
I think that is the question, because when somebody feels that they need something to integrate their experience, is that there's some suffering, there's some discomfort, there's something there that is not working. Yeah. And then one of the first questions that I ask when somebody comes asking for integration is like, all right, tell me what would mean that this experience is integrated. So let's imagine for a moment that we do some integration sessions, and one day you reach that integration and you tell me, hey, Mark, we don't need to continue doing sessions because I can handle it on my own. What needs to happen for us to agree that we have reached that moment? So again, beginning with the end in mind. What does integration mean for you at this point? Because it is not reasonable to pretend that I can magically integrate somebody else's experience with all the implications. What usually people ask for is support in a particular moment because they are experiencing a certain problem, certain anxiety, certain symptoms that usually appeared after a difficult psychedelic experience, and they need support with that to feel that they can continue with the process of integration on their own. So I see the role of an integration therapist as providing that specific support in a limited time frame, some intervention that will work, that will unblock the situation so people will feel that they can go on their own, and then they don't need to continue an integration process. They can do the integration, whatever that means, on their own.
Yeah, and I love that, and because I at least for me personally, I feel it's so important to empower people in their process, and I really feel that your work really does that. That it's not about me telling you like, well, here's what you need to integrate, and here's your problem, and let me identify it for you, and then I will give you the checklist, and you've officially been integrated. Congratulations,
When you say it like that, it sounds like very common sense. Yeah.
right?
But truth is that a lot of practitioners don't work like that.
They do
And
not.
we end up giving homework to participants and telling them that they have more problems than they thought they had. And I don't think that that's the role, or I don't see myself having that role. I prefer to make people's lives more simple rather than complicating them more. So I guess that when somebody comes to me and is um, open to pay my fees is because they expect that I provide some support, and eventually they don't have to continue coming back. So that's the spirit of the work that I've been doing over the years.
Maybe it comes from I mean, I know I've mentioned more than once the philosophy bit, but I think there's an aspect of whatever we value or what we see as human well-being, like that, for instance, if we can naturally take care, our bodies will naturally heal. Our bodies will naturally heal. Our minds will naturally heal. Our hearts will naturally heal. Our spirits will naturally heal. And or become whole or become, some type of integratedness, right? And and I think this element of trusting people to be able to help support themselves, or even if it's just about giving them the scaffolding so that they can feel more empowered on their path, gives a sort of trust towards someone in their own journey versus saying the patriarchal sort of like, I am the authority, you don't know anything, you cannot be trusted to be able to make decisions for your own well-being.
And that's how psychedelics work. Psychedelics don't tell you go to the expert that will solve things. And psychedelics show you that there are answers inside of you, and actually good answers, and that if we provide the conditions, our bodies, our psyches, they naturally move towards a more integrated or to healing. I like to honor that same principle when working in psychotherapy or integration, to honor this psychedelic principle of empowering the person. It's not about me as a therapist, it's about you as a person. How can you find your own resources, and can you find your own integrated state, whatever that means for you? And I think that that's honoring what psychedelics, at least in our culture, are really about. That's why sometimes I am slightly concerned if we go to medicalizing psychedelics too much, then we are giving the power either to the psychedelic itself, the substance as an entity, yeah, or as a chemical, or to the doctor or the psychiatrist or the system. So somehow we're being disempowered again. And then I think that it's not going to work, because psychedelics, in my opinion, they work because we take them like that. Like, this is a tool that I can use, and we can relate with this tool, and this tool will show me things inside of me, and then I will have to do things with the things that I'm shown. It's a relationship with the substance, with the plant. It's not just I take passively a substance, or I go to a treatment and I receive the healing, and then when I go out, I'm cured. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and I think that's really wise, especially in terms of like talking about in terms of a relationship. And speaking of relationship, how do you support people in terms of relation? I know it'll be unique for each case, and we can't reduce all cases and all people to a particular definition. But is there some sort of ways you navigate? Like someone says they saw machine elves, or someone says the medicine told me, right? Or Mother Aya told me. What advice do you generally give people, or what things come up in conversations when these sort of ideas come up?
I am pretty open-minded towards any sort of experience. So if they saw self-evolving machine elves or entities or whatever, I'm happy with that. I don't have any. It's not that I believe it or I don't believe it. I think that reality is something that we co-create. So there are multiple realities, and we can live in the reality that we decide to live, or the reality that we perceive. So I have no problem with that. When I think that there can be problems is when we take our visions or the psychedelic experience too literally, like interpreting everything that we saw as the truth. And I don't think we should. We should treat these experiences as experiences. And the experience is not, it's important, but it's not the most important. It's what you make out of that experience, how that experience transforms you, that is actually important. sometimes ayahuasca tells people to do certain things. Well, first of all, I would start thinking, does this make sense in the current moment? Like, where's this coming from? Is it me that I'm telling that to myself? Is this a repressed desire that I have? And I think it's healthy to inquire about that and to reflect and not act out of reaction. Okay, I had this experience and I do whatever I saw in my visions. Same thing with starting a relationship or ending a relationship or giving up a job right after an experience because you were shown something really impressive. In the end, I don't think that it's so much if the substance tells you or ayahuasca tells you, it's more what you do with that. Because a lot of people tell a lot of things, but in the end, you have agency to decide what you want to do. And I don't know, I have full respect for plant medicine, but I don't know if we should do everything that ayahuasca tells us. Or maybe ayahuasca is talking also in metaphors and is talking about, there's multiple ways of interpreting what to do. Same thing with the Greek oracles. No, the oracle would tell you what to do, but it wouldn't tell you go right or left. It would give you an answer that was a little bit more complex than that. No, so there's room for interpretation there.
Yeah, I mean, at the entrance is literally know thyself before you've even come to the conversation, right? Which, could also be an allusion towards death, but we don't have to go there. But I love that you talk, like, it's about discernment and again, like that personal empowerment or even recognizing your agency in the relationship, even just taking it as the genuine experience, right? Not just like, this is a real experience that you've had, but now what are you going to do with it? If your actual mom told you to do something, you don't do everything necessarily your mom tells you to do either. But it doesn't mean that that's part of the process, right? Like, well, part of growing up is, you're learning what to do and what not to do and what things you feel are supportive and not, or is this the sort of, wisdom that you want to follow all the time, or is it not? The question still is there, whether or not you decide it's like a full spiritual experience or not.
I like very much what you said about your mom telling you things, and sometimes you do that and sometimes you don't, because that's true. I mean, we are always bombarded with messages of what we should do, what needs to be done. Society tells us what to do, and a part of growing up and a part of our personal process is realizing that my mom is telling me to do that or my mom wants me to do that. And it's not that I do it or don't, but I know that she would like that. Maybe that's in conflict with what I want. I have to evaluate that conflict. I have to look inside of me. And in the end, I'll have to produce an answer based on all that. So it's not that I'm ignoring my mom telling me you should study this or that. I'm taking that into account, but I'm putting it into a more complex system. Like, all right, but my reality right now is that this, and that. So, and I think that is part of integration, like taking all these factors, all these elements and putting them in the big pot and saying, okay, what can be done with these ingredients that I have been given, yeah?
Especially if we talk about in terms of like shadow work instead of integration work, in and of itself, right? That, Mother Aya is probably going to have some connections to your own mother. Let's just, we don't have to go, Freudian or anything like that, but the fact is, like, the relationships you've had in your life are going to reappear in altered states, and or even just your own meditation and reflection. It doesn't have to be, with a substance, someone else who mothers you as a friend, right? It'll bring up those same both golden shadow aspects, good things that I think are admirable, perhaps that your mother had, or maybe, the sort of the things you want trying to repress, the sort of what more people associate with shadow, like that sort of unconscious or even the collective unconscious of what, divine mother is, or what is like an earth mother, if Mother Aya is connected to an earth mother figure. That process of literally unearthing or coming into relationship with that archetype. Now I've gone Jungian, but still, right? Like that process of discernment and reflecting and shadow working and looking at it and looking at your daily life. It definitely seems that you get more out of the experience, whether it be a dream, a psychedelic experience, or a meditation, or a conversation you had with a friend.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately we should not forget that we're going to experience everything that we experience through who we are. So I am me and you are you, and things happen through us. Of course that there's a universal source, but I am not the same as a universal source. I'm a limited human being, so my experience is going to be mediated through that. So when I'm experiencing ayahuasca's spirit, I'm experiencing through me. When I'm experiencing the universal source, I'm experiencing through me. So we should know thyself, know who we are, and to know how this filter is filtering and modifying and tainting the light that's coming through.
So important. I mean, like, you're just saying something so huge right now. Like, I can't tell, like, even in terms of like training I've received from like, healers, intuitive shamans, all the things, right? I've always been told, well, I mean, in one way, form or another, but like appreciating that you are the medium through which this information is coming. And so, a spirit's working with, or whoever you want to see, source, or even the dreams or wherever, it's coming through you. It's coming through your experience. It's coming through how you see yourself, and just like a canvas or a paint can be limited by what colors you have or what kind of materials you have. If you're a let's say a singer or a performer, maybe you hear more songs, and the songs have a particular meaning to you that were connected to your mother, and she sang them to you as a child when you're a few months old, right? Not to bring back to your son again, right? But like the songs and these are the sort of stories that we tell ourselves, and not just the stories we live through lifetimes with our ancestry. The opportunity that I feel like, at least that I've gotten through integration and shadow work, is and experiences, is to notice those stories and to more consciously engage with them, and weave new patterns, new stories, dance with them, as it were, and not deny them, but work in relationship with them. And to me, at least, that's part of, for me, what integration is, at least in my experience, is being able to accept and work with all of your, parts, all of your history, all of what arises, and not be threatened by it, but see it as a part of yourself, or an element of growth, or another mirror that has wisdom to teach.
Absolutely, and I think that you're saying it, that the key is the relationship that we have with that, and the stories that we tell ourselves about that, and how important it is to work on the stories, because in the end, human beings are animals that tell stories, and we live with those stories. They direct our lives. That's why we have the sacred scriptures in each culture. These are stories that prevail in time. Yeah. For example, in the Jewish tradition, we have this thing of reading the Bible every year. You read the whole thing every year, and it's read in a certain way. Each week, a chapter. And when you've read it like several times, you know the stories, but each time you read it, it's a different story. How come that I didn't notice it the first time that I read? How come that this guy that seems so mean now seems not so bad? God is not so good in the... And psychedelic experiences are like that. And that's why we can integrate and read the same psychedelic experience over and over again. And integration never ends, because there can be another twist, another round. I've grown up through several years, but that experience of 20 years ago, look through the lens of who I am now, it looks different, so that's the beauty of working with that.
No, I mean, I'm still getting value out of it, like my earliest psychedelic experiences, like things. I mean, I wasn't taught anything. I wasn't given any proper, framework or prep, or like, have about this much of the bag type of like guidance, like which isn't much guidance. And then integrating those experiences, both the beautiful and the challenging, allowing ourselves that space to work with ourselves and work in relationship. I mean, like, because really, like, it really is about, I mean, I don't mean, it's not just us, but I mean, like, all of us, like the big us, like us as an individual, us as a person, but also us as a community, as a collective. Like, I think one of the beautiful and powerful things about people being more supported in experiences now, or that opportunity arising in the global North Western mindset, or a reintroduction or a reopening of Indigenous relationship re-honoring and reclamation, you could even say, right? Is that not just the healing that we get from that, from having done colonialization and trying to decolonize ourselves, but also the healing of the stories, the finding the wisdom, being able to gain insight and support and healing and, I don't know, being our best selves through these experiences and not seeing them as a threat to like all of society, right? Like don't touch any of these things because it's a threat to church or state or the powers that be, right? Or even your own identity. I mean, okay, yeah, it will transform them, but you're an illusion if you thought that these things weren't going to change to begin with.
Even more than that, we're seeing how now the mainstream is somehow modifying what psychedelics are, no? And psychedelics that once they were like spiritual tools. Think about the hippies in the 60s and the language they were using about their experiences, radically different than the language that we use nowadays of trauma work, of enhancing productivity, and new psyches. No, like, so we're seeing things in a different way. So there's been also transformation of these substances through the mainstream, and we should be aware of that as well.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think even just, like, this conversation is an example of that. Like, I feel like there's more of a sense of bridging of worlds than a sort of, like, us and them. And again, we have the wisdom of time and experience and perspective, but, and it's still changing, right? Like, who knows what my kids or your kids will end up saying, 20 years from now, and if they watch this conversation, it's like, well, they thought.
Yeah. I had today a client of mine asking me a very interesting question. Said, Mark, what do you think will happen with psychedelics 50 years from now? Will they still be around? The thing is that this guy is younger than me, so probably in 50 years, he's still seeing himself doing stuff in the world. 50 years from now, I don't know if I'm going to be here. I hope that I am. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, what happens with psychedelics after this generation or two generations? No,
Or 7 generations, right? I mean, you think about the mindset we literally talked before about having the end in mind, as it were, and yet here we are, we don't even know where we're gonna be a generation from now.
So my answer was that I'm more interested in the communal uses than in the psychedelic science, so to speak. So psychedelics as a medicine, I think it needs to happen. It will help a lot of people, but I think it's just a limited use for psychedelics. I'm more interested in psychedelics as tools for community awareness, community building, reconnecting with our fellow human beings, and finding points of shared humanity together, and reestablishing some sort of self-organized rights that will give meaning to the life that we live. I think kids growing up today have a tough world. It's difficult to know what to believe, what reality is, what has value. Everything goes so fast. Instagram, TikTok, I don't know. It's difficult to find how do you want to live. I'm sure they're gonna figure it out, but maybe the challenge that we face the most is how to find a meaningful life. Our parents maybe had it easier in the sense that through hard work they could achieve things, and that was the story of my parent generation. Work hard enough, you're gonna buy a house, a second residence, and you're gonna be able to go on holidays
And then you're having a good life, you have a meaningful life, you work hard, you've provided for your children, you showed up to work on time, and we're good.
and it worked for a while. But I think that nowadays new generations, that's a story that they know that they cannot buy it. Like a lot of people through the same model that parents lived, they want to make it. So the meaning needs to be found somewhere else.
Well, and I love that you bring up the idea of community and relationship, because I definitely, I'm a big believer and proponent of that, and part of the reason why I love these conversations is that, to me, they're community conversations where we're learning from each other and building relationship with, whoever is listening right now, maybe even 50 years from now. But but I mean, I'm definitely an incurable optimist, and I like to think that we've maybe opened up the pathway to new possibilities that weren't as possible for us. That maybe we're the bridge generation that helps to see some of the challenges of what we received before. And maybe all generations do this, right? That that we create new possibilities just like any other transformative experience. And now they have different possibilities. I think sometimes about when I was in high school, people weren't out of the closet. And now my kids' generation, like it's all very much a normal conversation. I know I'm in California, but still, I know there's other places in the world and it's not everywhere, but I can just see even in my own lifetime how much that's shifted, even in my own community in a period of, 25 years. And maybe this is a good place to ask, what would you recommend someone who's either curious about this work or just even about going on a journey of self-exploration, of doing shadow work, of trying to integrate challenging experiences like anything from a breakup to being a new parent? What's really a good source for them? What will really help, or what's helped you?
I think that what helped me, I was gonna go more metaphysical, but what has helped me the most is to have good mentors in life. I cannot value that enough. I was lucky enough, and that's why holotropic breathwork changed my life. Not because the technique itself, the technique is good and the context is good, but the people that I met there. I met like 4 or 5 adults that were like 20, 30 years older than me, that they had walked a path. They had walked a path supported by other people before, and they took me under their wing and they supported me through my process. They gave me feedback. They coached me to become the best facilitator and the best human being from their perspective that I could. And we established a relationship that went on for decades. And I think that is what really made a difference for me. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my teachers, and nowadays I think that that's a little bit more difficult because everything is online, everything goes very fast, and there's less and less time to establish an ongoing relationship with somebody that will get to know you, to see how you're doing things, tell you maybe try to do this differently or maybe explore this or that, but because they know you, because they want the best for you. So I cannot stress enough how important has been for me to find mentors. And I wish that everybody could experience that. Maybe this is what in the old days people used to experience when they were apprentices. Like you want to learn to do, I don't know, to be a baker. So you're an apprentice to the baker. You want to be a blacksmith. You apprentice with the blacksmith. And in the relationship with this person, you learn not only the craft, but to do it from an inner place that is, I don't know, supported by generations. And that gives you a lot of, I don't know, confidence, a lot of power. So I wish that we don't lose the connection with the previous generations. There's been a lot of good work done by psychedelic pioneers in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s. There's been psychologists and philosophers from hundreds of years ago. We have the Greeks that created the myths that's still important today. We have indigenous peoples that have been carrying certain knowledge. So somehow hopping on that chain of knowledge and humanity, I think that that's really, really powerful. And to feel that you're part of that chain and people came before you and some people will come after, that comes with a certain reassurance, also with certain responsibility and with a sense of purpose. So I don't know. I hope that people could find that.
I love that. I think that's really wise. And let's start our apprenticeship program. Because I think I think we do need more support in finding those mentors, and I think more people need to be willing to take on that mantle. And I'm so grateful that you've received that guidance, and it's a real honor and privilege to have received a little bit of guidance from me personally, and be a part of that hint of lineage, and also to be in conversation with you today, Marc. It's just been a real pleasure and delight.
Likewise, Sandra, it's been a pleasure having this conversation. Not the usual talk about integration, so I really appreciate that we've went to other places. That's really cool.
Good. I do not want the usual conversation.
So yeah, thank you so much for finding the time. And people can find me online under my name, Marc Aixalà, on my website. Can join the newsletter, which I don't share many things, but programs will be coming up in the near future. So feel free to get in touch and to be around and build a community together. So
yeah. Love it. Well, thank you for being in community with me, my friend. Much love.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thanks for being here with me today. If this resonated with you, subscribe wherever you listen and share it with someone else on their journey. And if you're ready to go deeper, take the free Inner Source assessment at innersourcepodcast.com. It'll help you discover exactly what kind of inner work you need right now and where to start. Until next time, remember that everything you're searching for is already within you.